My name is Stella Harper. I'm 38 years old, and 3 months ago, my marriage ended over a sentence that probably sounded small to everybody else sitting in that restaurant. But people never understand this kind of story from the outside. They think marriages collapse because of one dramatic fight. They don't. They collapse because one person keeps swallowing disrespect until eventually their soul gets tired of digesting it. The sentence itself was simple. If I want more, I'll find a woman who can give it to me. My husband Brandon said that while sitting across from me at our anniversary dinner. And the strange part is, I didn't even feel shocked anymore. Just finished. We lived in Tampa, Florida, in a 2-story house I bought a year before we got married. I worked procurement for a hospital supply company. Stable salary, good benefits. Last year, I made a little under $96,000 with bonuses. Brandon worked as a salon coordinator at a luxury salon downtown. He made decent money, too, around $40,000 most years, depending on commissions. Money was never the real issue. Respect was. For the first few years, we were genuinely happy. Not movie perfect, just normal. Sunday grocery runs. Shared chores. Vacation planning. Late-night takeout on the couch. Arguments that ended with apologies instead of scorekeeping. Back then, Brandon laughed easily. He kissed me in kitchens. He cared about little things. Then, something shifted. It started after he reconnected with his ex-girlfriend Vanessa and fell into this new social crowd obsessed with appearances. Every brunch became a photo shoot. Every vacation became content. Every purchase became a competition. After that, our life stopped being enough. Why don't we travel more? Why are we still flying coach? Why does Vanessa's boyfriend buy her jewelry every season? Why don't I think bigger? At first, I brushed it off. Everybody gets restless sometimes. But eventually, it stopped sounding like restlessness and started sounding like disappointment. Like I was constantly being reviewed and quietly failing. The specific fight that finally destroyed everything started over a car. 2 days before our anniversary dinner, Brandon sent me a listing for a white Mercedes SUV lease. $948 a month. $6,000 down payment. He said he wanted to manifest a different standard. I actually laughed the first time because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I told him no. Not because we were broke. Because I wasn't spending nearly $1,000 a month trying to impress people who would disappear the second life stopped looking glamorous online. We'd just paid over $7,000 for roof repairs that summer. His Jeep worked perfectly fine. My truck was paid off. I wanted our kitchen renovation savings left untouched. Brandon rolled his eyes and muttered, "You always think small." That sentence sat inside my chest longer than I admitted. Friday night was our anniversary dinner. Downtown steakhouse. Reservation at 7:30. Brandon arrived looking incredible. Beautiful people can be terrifying when they already decided to punish you before the appetizers arrive. We made it through drinks, pretending everything was normal. Then Vanessa came up again. Did you know Vanessa's boyfriend upgraded her ring for their anniversary? I stayed quiet. And Cassandra and her husband are buying property in Scottsdale. Still quiet. Some women actually enjoy spoiling the men they love, Stella. That one landed differently. I finally looked at him and said carefully, "I booked Cabo for us. I pay most of the mortgage. I cover utilities. I save every month. If you want something specific, ask for it without turning me into the villain first." Brandon leaned back in his chair. Smiled. That cold, public smile people use when they want witnesses. Then he said it. "If I want more, I'll find a woman who can give it to me." The server froze near the wine wall. I remember that detail vividly because suddenly the entire restaurant felt painfully sharp. The music, the glasses clinking, the smell of steak and expensive cologne. Everything slowed down. I stared at Brandon for maybe 3 seconds. Not angry. Not devastated. Just exhausted in a way that felt permanent. Then I said quietly, "Then start looking tonight." His expression changed instantly, like he thought I'd missed the script somehow. I asked the server for the check before dessert arrived. $186. I paid it myself and tipped well because none of this disaster belonged to him. Then, right there at the table, I pulled out my phone and canceled our Cabo reservation. That finally cracked Brandon's composure. "Are you serious right now?" "Completely." He laughed loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Cruel people always get louder when control starts slipping. "You're really throwing away a marriage over one sentence?" I looked directly at him. "No, Brandon. I'm ending it because you meant it." Then I stood up and walked out. My phone exploded the entire drive home. Brandon. Vanessa. Cassandra. Unknown numbers. Paragraphs accusing me of overreacting. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had 14 missed calls and one text from Brandon that began with, "You are so dramatic." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked inside our house, sat at the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and started dismantling my marriage, piece by piece. First, I accepted losing the Cabo deposit. Second, I paid a $300 consultation fee to a divorce attorney named Elena Brooks for the earliest appointment available the next morning. Third, I transferred money from our joint checking into my personal account. Not everything. I left enough for bills and normal expenses. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was preparing for chaos. That night, I slept in the guest room. At around 1 a.m, Brandon came home. I heard his heels against hardwood. Cabinets slamming. Closet doors opening violently. Then the guest room door swung open. "What are you doing in here?" "Sleeping." "Stella, stop this." I sat up and turned on the lamp. He was still wearing his dinner outfit. Makeup flawless. Face furious. "You embarrassed me tonight." I stared at him for a long moment before answering. "No, you warned me." He started pacing immediately, saying I was overreacting, saying I knew how emotional he became during arguments, saying real wives fought for their marriages instead of acting cold. That almost made me laugh, because the truth was, I had been fighting quietly for years. Paying bills, planning trips, maintaining the house, protecting our future, offering respect, even while mine slowly disappeared. Brandon wanted all of that, plus the ability to humiliate me without consequences. Finally, I said, "I have a lawyer consultation tomorrow morning at 9. He stopped pacing. "You called a lawyer?" "Yes." "Over dinner?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Brandon, over the last year." That silence hit him harder than yelling would have. For the first time that night, I think he realized I was truly done. Not angry. Done. He grabbed a blanket from the hallway closet and disappeared downstairs. I don't know if he slept. I did. Better than I had in months. The next morning, I met Elena Brooks. By 1:30 that afternoon, I had signed a retainer agreement, received a legal pad full of instructions, and heard the most important advice anyone gave me during the entire divorce. Document everything. Don't argue emotionally. People like your husband get cruelest when the audience starts disappearing. She was right. By noon, Brandon had already posted a black screen on social media with one sentence: "Never beg for the treatment you deserve." That was when I realized our marriage wasn't ending quietly. It was becoming a performance. 4 days after our anniversary dinner, my divorce somehow became a community event. Everybody suddenly had opinions. Vanessa had opinions. Cassandra had opinions. Random mutual friends who hadn't checked on our marriage once in 5 years suddenly became relationship experts online. Elena warned me this would happen. People like Brandon panic when they lose private control, she told me, so they try public pressure instead. She was absolutely right. That weekend, Brandon moved into Vanessa's townhouse for space. That was his phrase, not mine. He packed dramatically too. 3 giant suitcases, expensive skincare products, designer bags, half the upstairs bathroom. But he left enough behind to make it obvious he assumed he'd eventually return once I calmed down and apologized. That assumption irritated me more than the insult itself. Like my boundaries were just a temporary mood swing. Saturday afternoon, Brandon showed up at the house with Vanessa and Cassandra. Vanessa carried herself like a defense attorney preparing for trial. Cassandra had her arms folded before I even opened the door fully. Brandon wore sunglasses despite the cloudy weather, like he was arriving outside a courthouse with paparazzi waiting. He pushed past me immediately. "We're here for my things, and I'm not doing this on your schedule." I shut the door carefully behind them. "You can collect your belongings with notice," I said calmly. "Not by storming into my house with backup." "Our house," Brandon snapped instantly. "Not according to the deed." That sentence detonated the room. Cassandra stepped forward immediately. "Don't start that technicality crap, Stella. You're his wife." I looked directly at her. Exactly. Which makes what he said at dinner worse, not better. Vanessa jumped in before Brandon could respond. "This whole thing feels emotionally abusive," she said. "You're punishing him financially because your ego got bruised." That almost would have been funny if I hadn't spent the last year quietly funding most of our life together. Instead of arguing, I walked to the kitchen counter and grabbed the budget folder Elena helped me prepare.
Mortgage.
Utilities. Insurance. Roof repair. Groceries. Vacation deposits. Brandon's salon membership. His credit card payoff from January. Every number carefully documented. Then beside it, I placed Brandon's contribution summary for the previous 12 months. Half a page. Vanessa's expression shifted first. Cassandra's shifted second. Brandon's didn't shift at all, because pride was still carrying him. "This isn't about money," Cassandra said finally. "Great," I replied calmly. "Then explain why Brandon tied my value to it in a crowded restaurant." Nobody answered that. Brandon tried a different strategy then. Tears. Instant tears. Perfectly timed. "I can't believe you'd humiliate me over one sentence." I stared at him quietly for a second before saying, "One sentence is usually how the truth escapes." He physically flinched. The situation deteriorated fast after that. I was standing near the kitchen when I heard metal wheels dragging against concrete in the garage. I walked out and saw Brandon pulling my grandfather's rolling toolbox toward the driveway. My chest tightened instantly. That toolbox wasn't expensive. It mattered because it was my grandfather's. His initials were carved into one drawer by hand 40 years earlier. "Put that back," I said immediately. Brandon didn't even look at me. "Half of everything here is mine." "Not that." He kept pulling. So I did exactly what Elena told me to do if emotions started overpowering logic. I called the non-emergency police line. Vanessa looked horrified. Oh my God, Stella, seriously? Yes, I answered. Seriously. Two officers arrived about 20 minutes later. They listened calmly while Brandon performed outrage and Vanessa performed victimhood. The officers reviewed the deed copies, glanced through the property inventory Elena had instructed me to begin documenting, and finally told Brandon exactly what I already had. Disputed property needed to go through legal channels. Not emotional grabbing contests in driveways. Vanessa looked offended on Brandon's behalf. Cassandra muttered that I'd become heartless. Brandon cried harder once he realized the officers weren't automatically treating him like the victim. But the twist I never expected came later that night. His mother called me. Diane. I fully expected screaming. Instead, I heard exhaustion. Stella, she said quietly, what actually happened? No performance. No manipulation. No audience. So I told her the truth, calmly, from beginning to end. The dinner. The comments. The Mercedes lease. The threat. The social media games. Then I sent her screenshots. The canceled Cabo reservation. The financial breakdown. The note I typed immediately after dinner documenting Brandon's exact words. 10 minutes later, she called back. And this time, she sounded furious. He told me you refused to buy him a designer bag and lost your mind. I closed my eyes slowly. No, I refuse to keep living inside a threat. Diane went quiet for several seconds. Then she sighed deeply and whispered, "That boy has lost his damn mind." That moment affected me more than I expected. Not because I needed validation, but because for the first time, the truth was outrunning the performance. Brandon, of course, escalated. 3 days later, he transferred $4,600 from our joint account into his personal checking and labeled the transfer temporary support. Elena nearly laughed when I forwarded the screenshot. That memo line is going to age terribly, she said. We documented everything immediately. Account freezes. Financial disclosures. Spending records. I also removed Brandon as an authorized user on the travel card and changed every household password imaginable. Security cameras. Electric bills. Streaming services. Garage codes. Everything. Meanwhile, Brandon continued posting vague martyr messages online. Some women only love you when you stay useful. Silence reveals character. Being abandoned changes you. I never responded publicly. Not once. No subtweets. No Facebook essays. No dramatic videos. I let him perform alone. Instead, I installed 2 exterior cameras, changed the front lock to a keypad, and spent Thursday night eating takeout in complete silence at my kitchen island. And somewhere between the quiet and the stillness, something hit me unexpectedly hard. The house didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. There's a difference. When someone constantly criticizes your breathing, your spending, your choices, your existence, silence starts feeling luxurious. 3 weeks after the dinner, Brandon stopped trying to win the argument and started trying to win the optics. That part got uglier. He showed up at my office one morning wearing a white outfit like he was starring in a reconciliation commercial. Coffee tray in hand. Bakery box balanced dramatically against his hip. Telling the receptionist he wanted to surprise his wife. Reception called upstairs. I told them politely he was not allowed past the lobby and asked them to leave the coffee downstairs if they wanted. I never went down. Apparently, Brandon sat in that lobby for nearly 40 minutes before leaving, but not before dropping off a handwritten card that read, "You made your point. Come home to me." I photographed it immediately and sent it to Elena. 2 days later, a rumor suddenly appeared through mutual friends that I was secretly sleeping with a male coworker named Daniel.
Complete fiction.
Daniel was married with 2 children and absolutely furious his name got dragged into our divorce. When he learned Brandon was spreading the story, he emailed HR requesting formal documentation confirming no inappropriate relationship existed. He copied me on it. Another screenshot. Another document for Elena's evidence folder. Then Brandon crossed into something darker. Tuesday night around 9:47, I received a text from an unknown number. Diane collapsed because of all this. If you ever cared about her, call Brandon now. My stomach dropped instantly. I called Diane directly. She answered on the second ring from a Target checkout line.
Completely healthy. Completely confused.
When I explained the text message, silence filled the line for several seconds. Then Diane said quietly, "Oh, I'm done. I'm absolutely done." Apparently, Brandon had been telling people I ignored a serious family emergency to make me appear cruel. That night, Diane sent me screenshots of Brandon complaining to friends about everyone making him look crazy. The horrifying thing was, nobody was making him look anything. He was doing it himself. Elena used the office ambush, false affair accusations, fake medical emergency, and harassment pattern to push for temporary exclusive use of the house and attorney-only communication. We got the order. Brandon was furious. And furious people rarely get smarter. The official property pickup happened on a Saturday morning at 11. Elena strongly suggested I have a neutral witness present, but surprisingly, I didn't need to arrange one. Diane volunteered herself. That alone told me everything about how much her perspective had changed. Brandon arrived 20 minutes late. Not accidentally.
Strategically.
He stepped out of Vanessa's SUV, dressed like he was headed to brunch at a country club instead of collecting the remains of his marriage. Then I noticed something else. The green outfit. The exact green outfit he wore during our engagement photos in St. Augustine. That wasn't coincidence. That was theater. For a second, I almost admired the calculation behind it. Almost. He walked into the house slowly, eyes moving across the entryway like he expected nostalgia to soften me. "Remember this mirror?" he asked lightly. "We found it during that storm weekend downtown." I kept my attention on the inventory list in my hand. "Please stick to the items marked for pickup." His jaw tightened slightly. Then he smiled that same polished smile he used whenever he wanted to make me feel unreasonable. "You've gotten so cold." Before I could answer, Diane spoke from the hallway behind him. "No," she said calmly. "Consequences feel cold when you're used to control." The silence afterward felt physical. Brandon turned toward her so fast it startled even me. "Whose side are you on?" Diane crossed her arms slowly. "The side where grown adults don't threaten their spouses like they're shopping for upgrades." His face flushed instantly. I genuinely think that moment hurt him more than the divorce itself. Because public judgment from strangers is survivable. Disappointment from your mother is not. The rest of the pickup became painfully awkward after that. Shoes. Boxes. Decorative baskets I secretly hated. Bathroom products. Kitchen appliances Brandon suddenly claimed emotional attachment to, despite never touching them once during the marriage. At one point, he tried taking the patio speaker system. I said no. Diane said no louder. Vanessa, who had arrived halfway through to help, mostly stayed quiet after realizing the emotional tide had shifted against them. Even Cassandra seemed drained by everything now. Toward the end, Brandon stood in the driveway beside the SUV, while Vanessa loaded boxes into the trunk. Then he looked directly at me and said, If you go through with this, don't expect me to make it easy. I stared at him for a second before replying calmly. You already haven't. Something flickered across his face then. Not anger. Fear. For the first time since our anniversary dinner, Brandon finally seemed to realize the manipulation wasn't working anymore. Not on me, not on his mother, not even on the people he recruited to support him. A week later, we entered mediation. If I live another 100 years, I will never forget Brandon's opening demands. Half the appreciated value of the house. Temporary support payments. Part of my annual performance bonus. Compensation for what his attorney literally described as emotional support sacrifices that benefited Stella's career advancement. I almost laughed out loud. Elena didn't laugh. She simply slid our documentation across the table, one folder at a time.
Financial records.
Account summaries.
Harassment evidence.
Screenshots. False allegations. Property documentation. The fake emergency text. The office ambush photos. Every small, reckless decision Brandon made over the previous month suddenly became devastating when organized professionally. You could physically watch competence drain from his attorney's face. Mediation didn't finalize everything that day, but it shattered the fantasy Brandon had been living inside. And while all of that legal chaos unfolded, something strange started happening to me. I began feeling lighter. Not happier yet. Just lighter. Like my nervous system finally understood the danger was leaving the room. I started boxing classes 3 mornings a week at 6 a.m. Not because I wanted revenge body energy, because hitting something solid felt healthier than constantly swallowing anger. The trainer there, a retired firefighter named Monica, once told me, "Your shoulders tell me you've been carrying someone else's chaos for years." She wasn't wrong. Around the same time, I got promoted to senior procurement manager. 9% raise. Bigger responsibilities. A few months earlier, I probably would have downplayed it to avoid making Brandon insecure. Now I celebrated quietly by buying myself expensive sushi and eating it alone in peaceful silence. That was another thing I started noticing. Everything became calmer without constant emotional management. No criticism over grocery brands. No passive-aggressive comments about money. No comparisons to Vanessa's life. No tension every time someone posted vacation photos online. One Saturday after boxing class, I ended up getting coffee with a man named Ryan. It wasn't dramatic. No instant fireworks. No movie soundtrack. Honestly, the most attractive thing about him was how emotionally normal he seemed. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. When I mentioned going through a difficult divorce, he didn't immediately pry for details or perform fake sympathy. He just nodded slowly and said, "That sounds exhausting." And somehow those 3 words almost made me emotional. Because exhausting was exactly what my marriage had become. Constantly exhausting. Trying to prove myself. Trying to stabilize emotions I didn't create. Trying to earn basic respect from someone who treated love like a luxury subscription service. Meanwhile, Brandon continued spiraling publicly. More vague social media posts. More victim narratives. More stories about being emotionally abandoned. The strange thing about manipulation is, eventually, it becomes repetitive. People start noticing patterns, especially when the other person refuses to participate in the drama. One evening, Diane called me unexpectedly. Not to discuss legal paperwork. Not to defend Brandon. Just to apologize. "I should have questioned things sooner," she admitted quietly. "You trusted your son," I said. "No, she corrected softly. I trusted the version of him he performs for people. That sentence stayed with me for days. Because she was right. Brandon had become performative long before our marriage ended. Every disagreement needed an audience. Every emotional moment became content. Every problem turned into optics instead of accountability. And eventually, there's no room for intimacy inside relationships like that. Only performance. About 2 weeks before final mediation, Brandon sent me one final direct text despite attorney-only communication orders. I never thought you'd actually leave. I stared at the message for a long time. Because buried underneath all the manipulation and entitlement, there it was. The real truth. He genuinely believed I would tolerate anything as long as the relationship technically survived. That realization hurt more than the insult itself. Not because I missed him. Because I finally understood how little safety had existed inside our marriage for a very long time. I never replied to the message. Instead, I deleted it after forwarding a screenshot to Elena. Then I went to sleep peacefully. And for the first time in years, I slept through the entire night. Our divorce finalized a little over 3 months after the anniversary dinner. Fast by nightmare divorce standards. Expensive by normal human standards. By the end, I'd spent close to $17,000 between attorney fees, mediation, security upgrades, household replacements, and the lost Cabo reservation. Still cheaper than spending another decade negotiating with disrespect. The final settlement landed somewhere between what Brandon wanted and what I wanted, which probably meant it was realistic. I kept the house, my retirement accounts, my truck, my tools, my annual bonus. Brandon kept his Jeep, his personal accounts, his jewelry, and the money he'd already transferred from the joint account during his temporary support stunt. I also agreed to a final payout to permanently eliminate future claims tied to marital equity. No alimony. No support. No lingering financial attachment. Clean break. When the mediator reviewed the final numbers, Brandon looked genuinely stunned. Like some part of him still believed emotional manipulation would magically convert into legal victory. I think he truly expected the world to reward him for being louder. But reality doesn't work that way forever. What ultimately protected me wasn't one dramatic smoking gun. It was accumulation. The restaurant threat. The office ambush. The fake affair rumor. The false medical emergency using Diane. The social media victim campaigns. The financial transfers. The endless little moments that revealed character more honestly than any speech ever could. And underneath all of it remained the original sentence that started the avalanche. If I want more, I'll find a woman who can give it to me. In the end, the line he intended as leverage became a summary of why the marriage failed. 2 days after the paperwork finalized, Diane called me again. Not to interfere. Not to reopen wounds. Just to say something she'd clearly been carrying for a while. I raised him to speak his mind, she said quietly. I didn't raise him to treat relationships like luxury shopping. That one stayed with me. Because it explained everything perfectly. Brandon didn't destroy our marriage because he wanted nice things. Everybody wants nice things. He destroyed it because he began treating love like proof of status instead of partnership. And once respect disappears, romance eventually suffocates behind it. Vanessa vanished almost immediately after the divorce finalized. Funny how people disappear once there's no audience left for the drama. Cassandra texted me once afterward. Short message. Still defensive in places, but honest enough. I think things went too far, she wrote, but I understand now why you left. I never answered. Not out of bitterness. I was simply done explaining obvious truths to people committed to misunderstanding them. The rumors about Brandon afterward traveled through mutual acquaintances naturally. Apparently, he moved into a luxury apartment far outside his realistic budget. Apparently, he already hated his roommate. Apparently, he still told people I was controlling because I cared too much about budgets and not enough about romance. That's fine. People like Brandon always need a version of the story where consequences happen to them instead of because of them. As for me, I started rebuilding the house emotionally. I repainted the downstairs office, sold the massive mirrored console table Brandon insisted made the entryway feel expensive, used the money to buy a smoker for the patio. Tiny decisions. Quiet decisions. The kind nobody posts online because peace rarely looks impressive in photographs. But I noticed something else changing too. My body stopped bracing all the time. I slept deeper. My blood pressure dropped. The house sounded different. Not tense. Not performative. Just lived in. One evening, Ryan came over for dinner. Nothing fancy. Just smoked chicken, wine, and music playing quietly through the kitchen speakers. At one point, he looked around the house thoughtfully and said, "This place feels calm." And honestly, that might have been the nicest thing anyone had said to me in years. Because calm was exactly what I fought for in the end. Not revenge. Not dominance. Not some cinematic final victory.
Calm.
That's the part people misunderstand about stories like mine. They think the breaking point is the insult itself. It isn't. The insult is simply the moment the truth finally becomes loud enough to stop ignoring. The real breaking point comes when you realize you've been negotiating with disrespect for so long that peace starts feeling radical. Money never saves broken relationships. Neither do vacations. Cars.
Jewelry. Status posts.
Designer kitchens. Or perfect social media photos. Respect saves relationships. Gratitude does. Emotional safety does. The feeling that your partner is standing beside you instead of quietly evaluating your worth every day. Once that disappears, everything else becomes decoration around damage. Brandon didn't lose me because he wanted luxury. He lost me because he made it painfully clear my value to him depended on what I could provide. And love built on constant evaluation eventually becomes emotional slavery. I will never live like that again. Not for history. Not for appearances. Not for comfort. Not for anyone. Because if someone can threaten to replace you the moment you disappoint them, then they were never building a life with you in the first place. They were renting stability. And eventually, the lease expires. Ryan and I are taking things slowly. Very slowly. Which is exactly what I want now. No performance. No competition. No emotional auditions. Just honesty. Just peace. And after everything that happened, peace feels far more luxurious than anything Brandon ever begged me to buy.